everyone, welcome back to TV Guys, and here's what's making news. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And it's time for headlines. I don't have many headlines because we film ahead of time. So, I can guess what's going to happen in a couple weeks' time.
Well, I mean, the big headline is still going to be the election, unless this is after the election, and then it's going to be who won the election. I'm not sure how far in advance we're making this.
That candidate, he or she, sure had a great race, and yes. I called it. I knew they were going to get elected.
Matt and I are both either happy or unhappy with the result without telling you who we voted for, so we don't alienate half our audience.
All right, so if you are like us, and we're in October, guys. I know that you're in November probably. We're in October, and we're already sick of all the political coverage. So I can understand that maybe if you're coming into this episode, you're like, please don't have the same sort of political coverage. We are going to hit on political things, and there is some stuff modern political era too that's affected, but we're going to do our best to stay neutral. We might even tell you like some of our political leanings, but we're really not going to dive that side into it. We're just going to kind of give what we have seen in terms of the history of Daily Show, how it's affected politics. And it's a hard thing to say, hey, we're going to completely separate it from things that matter, because honestly, the way that the Daily Show operated and where we are now politically as a culture, it does matter. It affects every single one of us every single day, not just every 4 years, not just every 2 years for midterms, but it does affect us every day. So, we're going to have fun. We're going to enjoy as we do it, but it's going to be hard to leave political leanings at the door, I think, completely, but we'll do our best not to be biased.
Yeah, and I think I know where you stand politically, and I'm not exact lined up with you, but I'm close to you, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that I think are closer to what we call the middle than they are on the extremes. But what is it? There's a certain window. I can't remember what it's called. It's an official term for like the window of like what is considered central has moved. Even in the last 10 years. Do you remember what that term is? Someone in the chat is going to be like, I know what you're talking about. I know the exact answer. And I'll be like, I'm in the past. I can't magically read your mind. So here's what's fun about the Daily Show. So, we haven't given the preamble to of this. We've only done one episode like this. So we talked about Saturday Night Live a couple weeks back, probably about a month back by this point. And Saturday Night Live, they did have some political influence as well, even though they were poking fun, like their weekend updates and their political satire that they did. There was a lot of it that was just poking fun and commentary on the situation and weren't so much like news like Daily Show kind of gets into, but it did set a stage for Daily Show to follow in that footsteps. But with SNL in the episode that we talked about, the whole format of this sort of episode for us podcast wise is that we want to talk about what are the effects of this show. How is this show influential in TV, but also outside of TV? It just happens to be the case that both SNL and Daily Show affect outside of TV because of the way that they address pop culture and political items and things of that nature. When we do this sort of episodes in the future, it'll be less of like how it affects our modern culture and more of like how it affects other TV shows.
I don't know as much. I think anything you watch affects culture to a certain degree. I think the SNL and especially the Daily Show are affected more than others do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so we'll get into some of the questions of how Daily Show affected it. Let's real quick. So let's back up. Let's get in our time machine, jump back 30 years to 1996. Not quite 30 years, but around there.
Yeah.
1996, Daily Show debuted on July 22nd, created by Madeline Smithberg and Liz Winstead. And the two of them, they came up with this show that needed to replace this time slot because this time slot was filled for the 3 years prior by Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. Now, Bill Maher, he had success in that show. He went to ABC with the show Politically Incorrect because it started in Comedy Central, was there for about 3 seasons, and ABC wanted to pick it up. And so he was there at ABC for about 5 or 6 more years. And so they're like, well, what do? We need something like politically based, but not not in the same vein as Bill Maher, because Bill Maher tried to be a little bit more of, let me commentate, if that's the word. Let me comment on the political things that I'm covering. And their idea, it seemed like, and especially when they brought Craig Kilborn in, the first host, the idea started off where it's like, we almost want to be a parody of news. We want it to feel like more a local news segment. There's some national headlines. They're going to talk about national headlines. They're going to have popular pop culture guests like Bobcat Goldthwait and Janine Garofalo and Bill Murray of the day, all those like in that time frame. And so they'll bring those sorts of guests on. But there's a lot of reporting that was done that felt like just absurd. They'd go to these on-site locations and they talk to, hey, this is someone who is a nudist. This is a person who collects, I don't know, like who believes in Bigfoot. This is one who like chases UFOs. So they find like these really obscure people and they do like a piece on them like they're actually covering these people, but it was less the here's political commentary and more let's entertain you with faux news segments.
It's almost like news meets America's Funniest Home Videos.
Yeah, there is definitely a big piece of that of the on-site.
And that kind of the Craig Kilborn's Daily Show, I think you can see remnants of that in like The Soup or Tosh.0. That kind of stuff is a little bit more along that vein as you're talking. That kind of reminds me of those shows, which I don't even know if any of those are on anymore.
Yeah, it was big human interest idea. And then you mix that with the studio stuff of Craig Kilborn being more like a Jay Leno, Johnny Carson type. You know, he'd comment on things of the day, but never get so heavy-handed in it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really like, he blended well with the writers because that really was the general idea. They had a very strong voice right away where they knew that that's what they were doing. They weren't there to tell news. They were there to entertain. And so there was ridiculous, stupid segments. Some ideas that they had, like they did this segment when they'd go to commercial breaks called Hasselhoff History, or so like as it's going to commercial break, like on this day in Hasselhoff history, and they'd have some sort of fact about David Hasselhoff from years before. It's really stupid, absurd stuff like that, or something Craig Kilborn did at the end of each episode with his guests. As he was wrapping up the guest interviews, he'd do what they call 5 questions. So he'd have these 5 questions written, and some of them were like serious questions, or he's like, what's the capital of Montana or whatever? And then other ones were like stupid, like who left the cake out in the rain? And Bill Murray's like, someone. Ding, ding, ding. That's correct. And so like some of them, they had a right answer. And some of them are just like, you answer it and we're going to make a joke about how you answer. I think he asked like Mike Myers, Canada, what went wrong? So that was a lot more of Kilborn's style.
Yeah, which I didn't realize until I started doing this research that Jon Stewart wasn't the original host. Because this is still a little bit before our time. I don't think we ever were watching Comedy Central in '96. We were a little bit too young for that.
Believe it or not, I was.
You were.
I watched The Daily Show with every single morning before school. Like, I would go in and because they'd wake me up way too early and I'd be dressed right away. And so when I was at this age, I actually would go into my parents' room and sit with my mom and watch The Daily Show. And then there was a certain time, I think like even before that had been on, I would go in and watch Dr. Katz, if you remember that show.
Yeah.
So there's some Comedy Central stuff I watch, but we were a Craig Kilborn household. And like now looking back at it, we're like 7 or 8 and some of the jokes they did, I'm like, Mom, maybe you shouldn't have let me watch this.
I don't think my mom would have let me watch. So this is funny story. This past Friday, I was visiting my parents, and my mom made the comment that she didn't like the comment that I made on our Facebook when I was promoting our episode a few episodes back about the draft, saying this is the most important election to vote in. And she's like, I didn't really like that because the election is important. I'm like, yeah, that's the joke of it. I'm not. So I don't think she would have liked that humor.
Hon, I don't know if you know this, but who the president is important. Is it? Since when?
Yeah.
Doesn't America just run itself?
Well, depends on who you ask. But I mean, as far as I knew growing up was when I was. I mean, I suppose I was watching it later than you were. I always remember Jon Stewart as the host. Which
because Craig Kilborn only lasted 2 years. He was there from 96 to 98, and then he replaced Tom Snyder on the Late Late Show on CBS. For all you young uns, that means absolutely nothing to you.
Which one is the Late Late Show now?
Is that what's his name? Who was on Drew Carey? Craig Ferguson?
Craig Ferguson, he was.
Is he not anymore?
I don't think he is anymore because
I don't know. I don't follow. I don't follow that.
I mean, there's so many. There's the Tonight Show, the Late Show, the Late Late Show. What are they getting? Like the Super Extra, Super Late Show.
And at what point in the night does it become the early show, and then then the morning show, then the brunch show?
Matt, you said you already had something for trivia, so I'll just say this now. Do you know what TV special Jon Stewart hosted in '98, right before he started The Daily Show?
Oh, when I was looking it up, I saw something. I didn't write it down. I didn't think it was noteworthy enough. What was it?
No, it's just the fact that you wouldn't expect it. The one I'm thinking of is Elmo Palooza, a Sesame Street special.
I guess I didn't see that one. I saw, and when it's like, hey, here's some of Jon Stewart's credits before this. They don't include Elmo Palooza. They include, I don't remember what else they had.
Oh, you mean the special that was kind of dumb that basically was just characters singing their songs that aired once 20 years ago? That's not in the mix?
That's what Jon Stewart should do. Just come on the show and sing Sesame Street songs. Jon Stewart. So real quick, before we hit Jon Stewart, just one last thing about Craig Kilborn, that when he left, I mentioned the 5 questions things. I really liked the 5 questions format because it's such off the wall like way of doing, it's just like a rapid fire at the end and you never knew what you're going to get. And he actually had the trademarked the intellectual property of that. So Craig Kilborn, when he left, he was able to bring the 5 questions thing that he would do to his show on Late Late Show. So they weren't able to use that when Jon Stewart took over in 99.
5 questions. That seems like such a generic thing to copyright. So no one else can say, I have 5 questions for you.
I think just the format he did, it's one of those things that I'm sure they have a definition of what it was, but it's more like, it's like the NFL is like, I know what a catch is. I'll tell you what a catch is. It's very ambiguous, but you know it when you see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the legalese they use for his copyright, I think.
It sounds about right.
But yes, Jon Stewart, 16 years. So, I mean, The Daily Show itself has been on for less than 30. And even then it had some hiatus in there. So, and we've had Trevor Noah was there for a couple years, but he was only 4 or 5. So
I thought he was there for 9 years.
Because he came in 16 and then he was gone in 22, I think.
Oh, is that only that is? It says 15 to 22, so that's 7 years. Yeah, I suppose it's not as much as I thought, but still, Jon Stewart, and then now Jon Stewart is back part-time on Daily Show.
Yeah, which we'll get to, because Jon Stewart is the reason this show took off. Because Jon Stewart, when he came in originally, all of the writers, or most of the writers that they had, and a lot of the talent of the show stayed around for the switch from Kilborn to Stewart. And then Stewart came into the writing room, and he had actually, because he's funny himself and he's a good writer, he's like, I'd like to contribute. I'd like to be a part of this, and would make sure that the writing would match his comedic style, which makes sense as the host. But that the vision and the voice of the Daily Show, for the first little bit, it was not super established. And so there was this dichotomy of trying to figure out, what does this show look like under Jon Stewart? And because of that, a number of writers left, even though they thought they were going to be retained. And actually, and this should speak a lot to the writing that happens afterwards and what it looks like, some of the writers they brought in were Ben Carlin and David Javerbaum. Javerbaum or Javerbaum? I only saw it written. I don't know how it's actually pronounced. But they are both, they worked on The Onion before coming to The Daily Show.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about The Onion. Is that still a thing?
It is. And The Onion, believe it or not, I didn't realize it was as long running as it was, but The Onion was around before The Daily Show. So like they pulled these guys off of The Onion to work on The Daily Show, and it's a perfect fit. It really makes sense of that pairing.
I remember early Facebook, or like not early Facebook, around the time that everyone's parents started being on Facebook, that's when you started seeing Onion articles from people who didn't realize that it was parody.
And now that's everything.
Well, now real life sounds like parody.
The new whoops, I posted the wrong thing is AI images. People posting that, be like, look at this image, like that person in the background has 9 arms. I think that's probably fake.
Yeah. I've seen some really horrifying ones with like the Simpsons. I don't know why. I've seen some like it's the Simpsons family, but like Bart's missing a leg and half his face is Marge's hair or something. I don't know.
It's all those Treehouse of Horror episodes making its way into the AI programming.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jon Stewart, though, he was the one that brought, like I said, The Daily Show to what it was, because it won 23 Emmys under Jon Stewart, and eventually it reached an audience where within the first couple of years it had an audience of around 1 billion people a night, and I think by like 2005 2006 it had 2 billion people 2 million 1 to 2 million, sorry. He's popular, but he's not that popular. So 1 to 2 million in the first couple of years. But Jon Stewart's Daily Show actually ended up kind of course correcting out of these human interest pieces, and we're focused more on, we need to look at actual political issues, and they could take a harder line on certain stuff. There's still a lot of fluff. There's still pop culture references. There's still entertainment of the news, but they didn't shy away from hard-hitting like political topics at the time, and they would address things that like everything is fair game.
Mm-hmm. And starting with Jon Stewart in 98, the first like presidential election that they would have been able to cover would have been the Bush-Gore 2000 election.
Yep.
So, and I know that, I mean, politics is more than just the elections, but that is obviously a big source of like, Alden, that's all everyone's covering right now.
Yeah. I think the original Daily Show, with Craig Kilborn came in 96, but that was the very first year, and they didn't have the manpower to kind of provide any sort of like election coverage just to report on it after it happened. And so in 2000, they did their own election coverage. I don't think it was the same like into the night like any like CNN or NBC or whatever does, but they had Indecision 2000. And so it versus I don't remember what was the platform that calls it Decision like 2000. They were mocking that with Indecision. Yeah. And so that's where and Stewart said that that's really what he credits as helping them find their voice. A year and a half into it, when they started doing their election coverage, and especially in Indecision 2000, they're like, okay, this is where we know this is what we're doing. This worked for us, and we're going to double down on it.
And I think obviously what separates it from The Onion, because you said it has some Onion DNA, is a phrase I never thought I would say in this podcast in any form, Onion DNA, but is the fact that it's stories that are real. They're not making up fake stories. They're taking stuff that is real off the headlines and then, you said, commenting on it, and making jokes about it, and not really taking like hard, real stances, but just like, what can we say about this that's funny?
Yeah. And Jon Stewart is a registered Democrat, and so he came at it from a Democratic point of view. He did a really good job, I think, especially in retrospect as we look back, where he towed the line well, but they did recognize that they took more shots at Republicans than they did at Democrats. And Colbert and other producers and Stewart kind of all went on record because, like, at the time in 2000, the Republicans controlled the House, Senate, presidency, and I think they had more Supreme Court justices. So they're like, well, this is the position that's in power. It makes sense for us to attack the position in power. If we're attacking the Democrats, they're like, it feels like we're kicking a puppy. So they admittedly were like, yeah, we're going to favor a little bit more attacking the position in power, which I understand, but it kind of set this precedent that they never kind of moved the pendulum back. And so it was a little bit more left leaning when Stewart took over. But then just as time went on, and we're going to see that with Trevor Noah, it kind of ends up going so far. Actually, let me, I'll just even say it, like, because Trevor Noah moved it even further to the point that when Jon Stewart came back and actually started having coverage that was more equal, like he did, like, so he'd mock the Republicans, but then he'd also take shots at Democrats. And then the response of people when he would attack the Democrats was like astounding, and it kind of took him by surprise. Like, this is what we do. Like, we're here to make fun of this stuff. We're here to entertain. We're going to tell these things in an entertaining way. We're not sitting here kissing the boots of the Democratic whatever. We're going to mock what's worthy of mocking. And so it kind of showed how far a little bit that pendulum had moved for the bias of the Daily Show when he came back.
Yeah, I think most of like mainstream Hollywood actors shows lean left. I mean, with a few exceptions, like Tim Allen's Last Man Standing was one of the few right wing shows. Yeah. But even with that, I mean, like, the point, like no one is over mocking. Like, I saw the little bits of the SNL, going back to the first influential show we did, the SNL election coverage, and I gotta say, Jim Gaffigan made a hilarious Tim Walz. I don't know if you saw that or not.
I didn't watch that.
Yeah.
And then Dana Carvey Biden?
Carvey was Biden. Yeah. Maya Rudolph was Kamala, and then they had someone new as Trump. They didn't bring back Alec Baldwin, and then they had someone else.
Isn't he arrested? Is Alec Baldwin like free right now, or
I don't know? But that would be a funny parallel to have him arrested playing Trump. And then they had someone as JD Vance, but I think the funniest spot on one was they had Jim Gaffigan as Walz, which was hilarious. And even though it probably does tend to still lean more left, like you said, Jon Stewart. I mean, I've seen enough serious interviews from him that you know where he leans politically. Yeah. But the fact that they're like, even though this is what we think, we're not going to just never make fun of the left side is.
And I don't think anyone should be. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't think anybody should be over mocking.
Yeah, it was kind of funny to see them give a counter programming with the Colbert Report, because Stephen Colbert is also a Democrat, but he decides to portray a Republican, like, and so this is again that same sort of mockery where he made fun of Republicans, but he did it in such a way that there's so many Republicans who watched it were like, hey, this guy's got it going on. And they like watched him unironically and like would root for some of the stuff that he would root for facetiously. And like he had this character, and actually the Colbert Report formed a super PAC for Republican candidates at one point. And it just like the ridiculousness that was the Colbert Report and how much he dedicated to that role was really worthy of admiration, I got to say.
If we're not going to come back to the Colbert Report, I want to mention that because okay, I told Matt before we started, I always watched more of the Colbert Report because I just love Stephen Colbert's style and his over the top. Like, I don't know. Okay, I was like a dumb teenager and I could tell that it was parody. So, but there's one sketch that was hilarious. It was Stephen Colbert, the character Steve Colbert, talking about people have been telling me that they take my clips of me and they rearrange them and make them sound like I'm saying other stuff. You know where I'm going with this?
Yep, I remember this.
This sketch, he did this whole thing where he had interviews, and he's like, "What do you have to say to the children of the world?" He's like, "Oh, you are all so sweet. What do you have to say about America's enemies? You little idiots we're going to come get you and kill you," and basically making it super easy to like rearrange his, and it was done on purpose. And at the end, he's like, "Do it, see what you can do with that, wizards," as if he just beat them. And it was just hilariously mocking everything. And it was just, I didn't go there. I mean, I probably did get some news because again, on the Colbert Report, they talk about stuff that's happening. But I went there just to laugh at Stephen Colbert. But I also ended up learning some stuff in the process.
Yeah. I definitely want to make sure, because I think the bulk of what we're going to talk about is really how the next generation, which is really kind of us millennials, and then the generation below us. I always forget what that is. Because I'm an elder millennial, I think, and so like the younger millennials, I think, is what I'm talking about.
Well, we're in the middle, I think, because I think millennial goes to like people born in the early 90s, like 95, 96 is like the cutoff. So I think we're still clearly millennials, and then there's Gen Z after us. But
yeah. So like we're gonna talk about how it impacted that. So I just wanted to boomerang back real quick to kind of finish this part of like the three different hosts. And so when Trevor Noah, I know names, when he came in, I already talked about how he was a little bit more left leaning, but he did a lot. He's very talented and knowledgeable. He had good impressions. He knew a lot of different languages, and he had a very different culture growing up in, I can't remember where in Africa, but growing up in Africa and being well-traveled, he had this different sense to him that just really was a completely different flavor than the classic New York man of the people Jon Stewart was. And so really, like, they apart from, like I said, the left, like leaning a little bit more into that left, they didn't change their style all that much, but it did change drastically just because of who Trevor Noah was. That's hard to say fast.
It's a hard name to say. I'll give you that. That's why I'm letting you say it.
Appreciate it.
I'm just going to call him Trevor.
Good old Trev. So he was around for 7 years. He had the hardest block in that starting in 2020, and Daily Show, that was the other thing of where it went, is that they kind of had to change it. And here's the problem with how they changed it in 2020 is because the way that they have it structured, it's more like a YouTube video of an influencer talking directly to you, but he still kind of treated it like he was back in the studio. So it still had the cut professionalism of the studio instead of the very informal, like it's clearly in his house that he's talking to us. And the people who had the best success in 2020 were like those YouTuber influencers, because it's like, okay, we're bringing you into our house, and if I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you like a friend and not like this is the production that I'm putting on. So I didn't feel like Daily Show matched that energy, which is weird to say. You were aspiring to a YouTuber and you fell short. But yeah. I think that's where we saw the Daily Show's numbers dip, because people saw through it and it felt disingenuous.
But you think they could have a studio just would limit the number of people? I mean, him standing at the desk, he's not going to be near anybody. I feel like you could have a minimal crew, like and have barriers behind the cameraman or whatever, and
people had to travel anyway. Like they traveled to his house to set stuff up. So it's like, I guess they're like, well, we can't make the talent leave. And I'm like, I don't know if I buy that.
Because like I went through Grey's Anatomy for some reason this year, and like that show filmed hospital stuff in the middle of COVID, so they couldn't have a guy behind a desk.
Nope, not at all. All right, well, we've promised. How does this impact our current society? And
it doesn't. End of story.
Doesn't. That, I'm sorry, it was a misnomer. This is not an influential show in any way. Not at all. Oh my gosh. Just like look at the political climate of a 2020 election, 2024 election, 2016 election. Look at those elections versus, say, 1996, 1992, 1980. Even further. Like, we have changed so drastically in my lifetime, and even if you're like listening to it and you're a minor, maybe it's probably still changed so drastically in your lifetime. It's like really gotten intense, and so if we look back at like 2004, there was a study from East Carolina University that they found that 48% of young voters watch The Daily Show. Half of all young voters were watching The Daily Show. And 1/4 of that group watched no other news programs. So 25% of that 50% didn't watch any other news program. The only place that they got their news was the Daily Show. And in fact, it was like in 2009, it kind of like confirmed that because Walter Cronkite died, and Time Magazine put out like this, hey, who's the most trusted face in America then if Walter Cronkite's dead? And so they had all these different anchors to answer that question, and people unanimously wrote in. 44% said Jon Stewart over like 30% some, I can't remember who it was. I want to say Dan Rather, but that doesn't sound right.
Could be.
Or Brian someone. I can't even remember these anchors from but I remember Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
And exactly. so he was the face of news. And it's funny because like this is the question that has been brought up, and you kind of talked about it before we even started this episode. Jon Stewart and different producers of Daily Show and different people who worked on it, they all have been adamant, especially around this time. I don't know in the last couple of years if it's changed, but in the early aughts to like 2010, for sure, they felt this way, that they were not trying to be sincere. They were trying to entertain. They weren't there to provide the news. They didn't feel a journalistic integrity. And in fact, people, when they have complaints about Jon Stewart, they'll say, hey, when you have these segments about George Bush, or, well, actually, George Bush never came on the show. When you have these segments about...
he had Obama on the show.
He did have Obama on the show, but he liked Obama. He didn't talk bad about him too much. But let's say Henry Kissinger, because I think they did have Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, he was on the list. I remember. Yeah.
So they're like, you have this segment about Henry Kissinger and about how terrible he did and why his policies and the stuff that he said and put into action hurt America, and you didn't pull a punch. And then you had him on your show and you just talked casually and you're really informal with him. And people would call that out and say, hey, as a journalist, you can't let him escape being one-on-one with you without asking those same hard questions you can do when he's not in the room.
Yeah, exactly. And then his response, the one I said, was the famous response was, the show leading up to ours is puppets making crank phone calls, as a way to say, like, you shouldn't take us seriously.
Yeah.
And it's like, it kind of goes like intention versus, reality. Like, they didn't intend to be a people's news source, but for a lot of people, and more than they thought, they ended up being that. So it's like, does that give them the responsibility, or is it not, because that's not their intention?
Yeah, because it really did change the way we viewed media. There was a Gallup poll that looked at how America looked at their news. And in 1974, close to 70%, on the low side, 60-some percent, but close to 70% said that they either had a great deal of trust or a decent amount of trust in their media and their news media. That was back in 1974. 2/3 of people thought the media was doing a good job. They trusted it. Jumped to 1996 when the Daily Show started. That number had fallen a little bit. It was still high 50s, low 60s. So it's still a little under 2/3 of all Americans. Mm-hmm. 2022, when this survey was done, 34% had a great deal of trust. That's half of the people that trust in the media, half of what it was in 1974. And you're like, I don't know if that's related, but I think it really is. I think seeing these jokes and taking things not seriously. And again, I was very entertained by Daily Show. I think it's funny. I will laugh at like the Weekend Update stuff for SNL. I think political humor can absolutely have a spot, but we had so much political humor that now, how do we get our political news? We sometimes get our political news through memes. Like that's a huge way that like both campaigns, I think especially like I've seen some coverage on like the Harris Walz campaign that they're really pushing to use memes to get in young voters. And I'm like, that is an absurd strategy that easily could work.
I saw a political thing. Well, it's a skit that was on TikTok, and it was making fun of political attack ads, and it was all based on Tim Walz, because right when she announced Tim Walz as her running mate, and it was like, Tim Walz caught in another lie, Reports show that when his daughter was 3, he told her he got her nose, but actually it was his finger the whole time. And just like ridiculous stuff like that, and making fun of like all these attack ads for everything. And yeah, like I honestly I found out that Biden dropped out of the election on TikTok, and then I went to I looked it up to see if that was real.
Yeah,
like that was kind of like my jumping off point for actually learning that information.
Yeah, there was a time, like I think that where the rubber meets the road, I feel like for being educated from entertainment news versus entertainment news actually probably being a detriment was right before 2016. Because like in 2015, President Obama used social media to his advantage because he was rolling out his Affordable Care Act and he was going to all these different websites. And I don't know if you remember it, but he went on Between Two Ferns. He had a BuzzFeed video. He was on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. I don't know if I remember he was on Daily Show in like 2010. I don't know if he came back on in 15 for this, but like in all those areas that he was on and doing these different videos, where he was entertaining. The commander-in-chief was entertaining the public through web content. And in each of those videos, he made sure to hit the talking points. Register by so-and-so, and then you'll pay less than this for your affordable care for health insurance. And like, he would have the talking points in every single one of those videos. He obviously wasn't doing this just to do it. He did it with an agenda, which is fair. He's the president. He's trying to communicate something. But his method of using web content was unheard of until 2015. And we saw that happen. And then in 2015, or maybe it was early 2016. I can't remember when Trump made his announcement for election. And like, you just saw the shift of entertainment media go from we're entertaining to it like became weaponized. It like, you just look at how the media regards President Trump, and then you can also look at right-wing media, how it regards Harrison Walls as well. And you just look at how the media reports their news, and it's weaponized. And so actually after 2016, when we were talking about that same Gallup poll, Democrats, this is crazy. Democrats' trust in modern media went from 50% before 2016. 50% of all Democrats said, I think media is doing a good to fair job. After 2016, or starting in 2016, it went from 50 to 80%. 80% of registered Democrats said media is good and I can trust it and is doing a great job. Republican went from 36% were saying this is a good job or a great job. It went down to 14%. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone out there who knows any Democrats or Republicans. Actually, it was a surprise for me who knows Democrats. I don't think it was a surprise for anyone who knows Republicans. Independents, in 2016, it went from 30% were saying they do a great job. Less than Republicans had independents had faith in media. They had less faith than Republicans did. It went from 30 up to 50% of all independents said that media was doing a good job in 2018 at the midterms. After the midterms, it dropped down to 27%. So still higher than where the Republicans ended up, but lower than when they started. A record low for the amount of independents who trust in news media.
Yeah. And like and all this, I mean, this is all sort of stems from the Daily Show, but all of these comedic shows, really, the Daily Show is kind of at the center of it. And it has, I mean, a lot of these numbers have to be either indirectly or directly affected by the Daily Show, which is why we're making this episode.
Yeah. And it can sound, again, this is where I said I'll try not to get into political leanings, but I mean, you guys can probably read between lines. And so this might sound conspiracy theory, and I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist on this, but like looking at how the Daily Show admittedly were saying, yeah, we're going to be more left leaning in the early 2000s because Republicans are in power. I understand that. That's fine. I don't think they ever course corrected from that. And so I think we had a generation of people who were watching news on through Daily Show and not through any other thing, and saw, okay, Republicans are the ones that are worthy of being mocked, and they kind of connected with that, and it informed their decisions for voting going forward and for how they viewed. And you might be like, well, I can point to all these reasons that Republicans, like, sure, I'm sure you can, but I'm just saying, how does this not affect us? How does not seeing one group be more of a punching bag for so many years create a sort of political climate where they can continue to be a punching bag? Because again, Jon Stewart came back and people were aghast that he would have the audacity to take a shot at a left-leaning member of Congress, Republican, or not Congress, of Congress or Senate or president, etc.
You know what that reminds me of when you said that, and he said that? It reminds me of South Park, because South Park made fun of everybody. Yeah. And in the early seasons, they had Isaac Hayes playing the chef, and then he was a Scientologist. And then after they made fun of Scientology, he quit.
Yeah.
And they're like, who are we not mocking at this point?
Exactly. And that's where I come from too, is like, yeah, sure, there are things that I hold dear, and if you're going to mock them, I'll be like, oh, I don't. But if I know that you also are just like, you will mock where the joke is, I can understand that better. When I see that you're like, this is the one group that I mock, I'm like, that feels targeted, and I don't buy into that sort of humor.
Yeah. As my background, you're talking about Between Two Ferns. One of my favorite jokes when Obama was on Between Two Ferns, Zach Galifianakis was like, so, I mean, don't you kind of wish you could just go for a third term and keep going? And he's like, no, I think it's good to have a 2-term limit. It's kind of like, they made a third Hangover movie, and that wasn't too great, was it? And then he just says, staring at him.
By the way, other quick tangent about Zach Galifianakis. He is on the most recent season of Only Murders in the Building, and so he's really good in it. He plays. So Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez, their characters have gotten famous by this season, and Hollywood decided they're going to make a movie off of that podcast. And so Zach Galifianakis is who they cast to play Martin Short's character. And so Martin Short and Zach Galifianakis have some really fun back and forth. And when they first meet, and Martin Short can't pronounce Zach Galifianakis' last name, Zach just responds like, "Are you between two fernsing me?" He's like, "People do this to me all the time."
Yeah. But is Between Two Ferns still going?
I don't think it is. I remember when the movie came out, I think that might have been their like, okay, this is it. We got our movie. We're done.
Okay.
Which the funniest parts of the movie were the Between Two Ferns segments, and then they went to the story that was holding the movie together between the segments, and it wasn't nearly as funny. And it's like, get back to the Between Two Ferns.
Yeah.
It's crazy how the thing that they were popular and famous for that got them to create this movie in the first place was the best part of the movie. I can't understand that.
It's always like how like a lot of times Comedy Central, like stand-up specials are like labeled or like marketed as movies. But really, it's just a stand-up special. They might have a few shots of the city or like maybe a skit in the very beginning. But like, really, we're just watching their stand-up. Why don't we just call it a stand-up special? It doesn't have to be a movie.
Yeah. So with coming back to Daily Show, I think we made a point really well. Even if we're not, I think we're kind of drawing our own conclusions. You and me, we're like, yeah, I think this isn't good. But I understand that people might not agree with that conclusion we've drawn, because like, how much can you blame on Daily Show? And there are times too when there was an episode that Jon Stewart did where we saw, you probably have seen the video of him addressing Congress because of the funding for the families or the firefighters in 9/11 and the rescue and the first responders, like how there was supposed to be funding for them. And they had promised this, and it's like 15 years later, this funding still hadn't come through. Yeah. And he took him to task about it. And he actually, like, I don't remember what it was that like set him off on a certain, like, I know what it was, but there was a certain episode they did that was a similar thing where it was like the funding fell through, or it was like it was getting pushed to the back because like, okay, it's out of public consciousness. And so Jon Stewart took an episode and just dedicated the entire episode to that issue to put it back in the forefront. And it's like, okay, John, that's great. And I'm glad you did that. But you clearly have shown you have the willingness and desire to use your platform and use your show to address things that are going on politically, which is how journalism should be. Journalism should hold accountable when the representatives are failing us. And so there's two sides of that coin with Jon Stewart. And so it's like, I get where people might be coming from. Like, you got to attack, you got to go stronger. And we have a culture now that I usually have my own, like, here's the history of how we got here, and I've given some history here, but there's something I don't quite connect here, where our culture currently is very like, we need to do something. Protesting, we need to like be loud until things happen. And if that doesn't happen the way we want it to be, we need to get loud again, and we need to protest or sometimes riot or throw, and like, we've had plenty of conversations between both sides of where that falls. But like, this political activism needs to be first and foremost. And so there's a younger generation that I think is younger than the ones who grew up on Daily Show, who are like, I just want to consume and entertain. And now we have a younger generation that's like, okay, you're just consuming and you're entertained by this, but where's your follow through? Now we have to follow through on this. I don't know the point I'm trying to make, but I think that the next step after the consume has been, we're mad and we need to do something about this. And if we are, that's where I was going, because that same study that I talked about in 2004 that we started this whole like section off with, that same one where it's saying 48% of young voters watch The Daily Show, all of those voters, both Democratic and Republican, expressed cynicism for both their candidates and the other candidates as well. It doesn't matter which candidate they were they had cynicism. It was growing, this cynicism for the established order of whoever was in charge. And it actually showed that they were less likely to vote. And so it kind of created a group of people that are not the young generation that are loud now on social media, but the ones who today are like 20 to 30 years old that were like, I don't know if I even want to vote, because what's the matter? It's two different turds that I'm voting between, and I don't know if I want to vote that way.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I definitely get that. It's like, when there's so much attack, it's basically you're voting who's the worst. It's like, okay, who's the worst of the two bad options? And honestly, that's how a lot of people feel.
Yeah. And our country started off where saying, hey, the person that got second, they get to be vice president. That didn't last very long, because I don't think that they were able to get as much done when they had their opponent as their right-hand man. But
and can you imagine Trump going from president to being vice president under Biden?
I want that as a reality show now.
Yeah,
I want to watch that.
Oh, also,
it's Biden and Trump. Biden and Trump.
Here's fun fact that's
weird and the other's a grump.
Ooh, nice. I'm glad you kept going, because I wasn't sure you were going with that. That would be perfect. Fun fact that's actually completely neutral. If Kamala gets elected and Jimmy Carter can stay alive until her inauguration, we will, for the first time in our country's history, have 7 U.S. living presidents. Right now we're at 6, which is the most that we've ever had in our history, in our country's history. So, I mean, obviously, if Trump is already one of the 6, so if he gets elected, it wouldn't change anything. But if Kamala, she would be the next one. But that would mean that Jimmy Carter would have to stay alive that long.
The last time you gave us like a fact like that of like election that has either a Bush, Clinton, or a Biden in it, then Biden dropped out shortly after you had said that. So if Jimmy Carter dies before this episode airs, I am going to blame you personally.
Okay, I thought he died today. So I saw on Facebook, one of our friends that we both know,
I saw that too,
changed his Facebook photo to Jimmy Carter. I'm like, did Jimmy Carter die? And then I Googled him. No, it's just because we're recording this on his 100th birthday.
Yeah.
That's why.
Which this day holds more specialness to me. I'm a Disney fan, and this is the anniversary of both Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World and Epcot Center. Both of them opened on October 1st. but like
Nice.
13 years apart. So
yeah, Matt's one of those guys that goes to Disney as often as he can.
I do.
And I'm one of those people who the last time I went to Disney World was 10. So I haven't been there in 26 years.
Brian just watches that Full House episode where they go to Disney World over and over and over.
Hey, I watched the step-by-step one too.
Look at you branching out finally.
No, I do want to go either Universal or Disney sometime in the next few years. But
nice.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about that, where if you go like as of next year or later, there's the new Universal park to go visit.
Yeah.
So it'll be worth it, I think.
Yeah, I mean they're both definitely worth going, but basically like I want to go and like spend obviously either one you'd want to spend more than one day there. You'd want to go and make a whole trip of it.
And if you hear that the Monsters, Inc. roller coaster is actually taking over Muppets Vision 3D, you'll be like, no, not on my watch. I'm going there now to go watch it one last time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Muppet Vision 3D, even though I'm a Muppet fan, it's not one of those productions that I'm like, this is the best the Muppets have ever done. It's like, it's cool that they're in Disney World. It's cool you can go and see Sweetums in person. But like, I don't know. Like, I don't want it to get destroyed. But also, maybe they could like record a new show and swap it out and keep it updated.
You know the Muppet community enough that if they did that, people were like, this was Jim Henson's last project. Like, that would be even worse than just getting rid of it to begin with.
I know, but what if they say, like, we're going to keep it in rotation? Like, we'll do this new one, then we'll go back to the old one, then the new one, back to the old one.
They won't do that.
I get it. Like, here's the thing. I'm the Muppet guy on this podcast. I'm following the 70 Years, 70 Muppets podcast, which, plug for that.
Brian is the Muppet guy. He's actually controlled by a puppeteer. So
yes. That's why you never see me using
a man inside of me controlling me with little controls.
Yeah. All right. Do you have anything else to talk about the Daily Show, or I think we've covered it all?
I don't. Well, let's move into trivia here real quick. So last week was we talked about Halloween. If you had a good Halloween, that's awesome. If you didn't have a good Halloween, don't worry, it's November. So you forget about it. Thanksgiving's in a couple of weeks. Just be dreaming of turkey. But we did an in-depth look at the Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode from season 1, Halloween, with the very first instance of the Halloween heist. And in that episode, Charles Boyle comes out dressed as a character that I was going to say we know and love, but actually I didn't know who this person was outside of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But who was that person that he dressed as? And it was Mario Batali, the chef.
Which is fitting for Boyle.
It is. He's a big foodie.
I also would not have been surprised if he came as Rachel Ray. So,
or like a combination, half and half.
Yeah.
Rachel Batali. All right. Well, this week, instead of doing trivia, we're going to do our own version of 5 questions. And so this isn't for you guys. This is for Brian. Brian gets to answer these questions. We'll see what he says. And if it's great, then...
Do I answer them now or do I answer them next time?
You're answering now. This is rapid fire. So
okay.
You'll kind of get a little taste. I think I nailed the feel of the 5 questions dynamic. I feel good about it.
All right, I'm ready.
Question 1. What channel originally aired The Daily Show?
Comedy Central?
Ding, ding, ding. Correct. Question 2. What is the secret ingredient in a BLT?
Toasted bread?
I'm sorry, we're looking for bacon. We also would have accepted love.
I'm not sure bacon's a secret.
What? That's fair. Number 3. What does the acronym WAP actually stand for?
Weird Al's pants. I'm going to go with that.
Judges, that's correct. All right, number 4. What is the worst thing about the game of soccer?
It exists.
Ding, ding, ding. Correct. Number 5. Where did all the redheads go?
My house. They're all back there.
I have no way of validating if that is correct or not. So we're going to give it to you. Ding, ding, ding. Well done. All right. Well, until next time, everyone, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And now for your moment of Zen.